It's time for Recipe of the Day. You know those sugar cookies that you see at this time of year that are cookie cutter shaped and perfect, and you see them and you wonder how they got them to hold that shape so well, because when you tried making them and you cut them with your cookie cutter and then you baked them, they did not hold their shape at all. They spread. Your Christmas trees were puffy triangles, reindeers were weird ovals, Santa's elves were abominable snowmen. You know what I mean. Well, you also know that I don't really have a sweet tooth. So if I am going to spend time making anything sweet, it had better work. And that is why I came up with this recipe for no spread sugar cookies. The key is to think about your sugar cookie dough more as like a hybrid shortbread dough and less like a traditional cookie dough. I mean, when you're making like drop cookies and things like that, it's okay when they spread and have a more organic shape. When you want something with those tight edges, you really have to think about the dough and what you're doing to it and what you're putting into it. So the first thing that is unique about this recipe is that there is no baking soda or baking powder in it. And that's because those ingredients help to lift the cookies, but with lift, there is also spread, and we don't want any of that. Instead, to get a little bit of lift, we're actually going to beat the air into the butter and sugar when we're creaming it and make sure that that is done enough to give us some of that little lift so that we don't have dense, hard cookies. You also want to use a butter with the least amount of water content that you can find. It usually means you're buying the more expensive butters. I'm not usually somebody who thinks it matters all that much, but in this case, it really, really does. So go and look for a butter with a low water content, spend a little bit more on that butter. There is also a little bit of cornstarch in the mix. That helps to absorb some of the liquid in the cookie, and that's going to help gel things up a little bit. Another thing is, once you've actually made the dough, it's going to be very important that you've either got it kept very, very cold or it's in the oven. There's no in between there. It never is going to be warm or at room temperature. And to keep it at that cold temperature for as long as possible before going into the oven, we actually roll it out right after making it and then chill it so that when it's time to cut them, you're just not having to roll. You're just doing the cutting and then they're going into the oven. You see what I mean? And I'm just going to say, do not be tempted for your second round of baking. Do not be tempted to use the same baking sheet that came out of the oven for your second round. Even if it's chilled a little bit, if it's been at room temperature for a little bit, it's still holding on to a lot of heat, and you're going to transfer your new uncooked cookies onto there and they are going to start to melt and they're not going to have the best effect. So get ready to use another cookie sheet. Ideally, put it in the fridge so that it is nice and chilled. Okay, let's jump into the steps of making these. Okay, you're going to start with slightly softened butter. So cut it into 1/4 inch pieces and then let it stand for 10 minutes. That's 1 stick, half a cup of butter. And then you're using a stand mixer with the paddle attachment. You're putting that butter and 3/4 of a cup of white granulated sugar, and you beat on high until it's pale and fluffy. A good 2 minutes. Scrape down the side of the bowl as you go. Then you're going to put the mixer on low speed and you're going to add an egg and some vanilla. And the reason you've got that on low speed is so it doesn't all splash around when you add the egg. So let it kind of mix on low until it's not like as splashy. And then you can turn it up to medium high and you're beating it until the egg is well incorporated. You don't want to like over mix it, but you want the egg fully mixed in, a nice smooth mixture. Now in a separate bowl, you're going to get your flour, 1 3/4 cups of flour, and you're going to sift some cornstarch and some salt onto that. And that's just so that it's really evenly distributed. Give it a stir. And then with your mixer back on low, you're going to slowly add that butter mixture to your butter sugar mixture. And you're just going to let it beat on slow until it looks crumbly. Then increase the speed to high and beat it for exactly 1 minute. Okay, then you're going to get out your sheet pan. Now we're doing that roll first chill thing that I was telling you about. So get out your sheet pan and you're going to cut 2 pieces of parchment that are the same size as that sheet pan. Okay, now move the sheet pan out of the way. We don't need that for a minute. Put 1 piece of parchment on your counter, put your dough in the middle of that piece of parchment, and then put another piece of parchment on top. Push it down like rectangular size. Just push, push, push down. And then you're going to use a rolling pin to roll it. Put the rolling pin in the middle of the dough on top of it there. You're going to push down and in one move roll away from you, and then put it back in the middle and in one move roll all the way to you. But at each time, you want to stop doing that before you reach the edge of the dough. Really, stop rolling before it goes all the way to the edge. Always when you're rolling things, the edge ends up thinner than all the other parts, and that leads to uneven cookies and like sort of burnt edges. We don't want that. So you're always going to roll away from you in one move, stop before you get to the end, towards you in one move, stop before you get to the end, then turn the dough, and then you do it again until it's 1/4 inch thick all the way around evenly. And you are trying to get this to be roughly the size of your baking sheet because you're going to then transfer that rolled out dough onto that baking sheet and put it in the refrigerator to cool for 2 hours, minimum 2 hours. You want that really nice and cold. It also allows the flour to fully hydrate and the cornstarch to bind some of that liquid. And finally, it lets the gluten relax, which is really important before we bake it. Okay, after the 2 hours, you're going to preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. And it is very important that your oven be nice and hot like that. If you don't have a thermometer in your oven, then you buy them at the grocery store for just a couple of dollars, you should get one. It's very important to make sure. So you put that in your oven, and when your oven's going, you can double check that the temperature you've set it for is the temperature that it actually is inside. My oven runs about 10 degrees lower than it should be. So I know that I need to have it at 385 for this recipe. You see what I mean? Okay, once your oven is preheated and not before, you're going to get that pan of dough out of the fridge and then transfer your parchment and dough over to your cutting board or to your counter surface, whatever you're going to make your cookies on. Peel off that top layer of parchment and then use your cookie cutters or a knife to cut the shapes that you want. Add a new piece of parchment to your sheet pan, and then you're going to transfer those cut cookies over onto there. The cut ends, the ones that aren't in the nice shapes, we're going to use those. Don't worry about that. Hang on. Once you have your cookie shapes, you're going to transfer that sheet pan back into the fridge for 10 minutes. You really want it cold. You see what I mean? And then they go straight from the fridge into the oven. You're baking them for 9 to 12 minutes until the cookies are just lightly browned on the bottom. Remove the pan from the oven and immediately transfer the cookies to a cooling rack, and then do not use that baking sheet for your next round. Okay, when those first batch of cookies are baking, that is when you can gather up those odds and ends cut from the first batch, and you're going to repeat that rolling, chilling process. So you are going to get it between two pieces of parchment paper. You're going to roll it 1/4 inch thick. Then you're going to put that in the fridge for 2 hours. Then you're going to cut those into your shapes, put them back onto a parchment lined sheet pan, into the fridge for 10 minutes, and then you're going to bake them until they're brown on the bottom. This recipe is going to make 15 medium-sized, like 3-inch cookies. Smaller cookies, you'll get more. Larger cookies, you'll get less. And if you don't want to fuss with cookie cutters, but you want like nice round cookies, what you would do is very, very similar in terms of all the baking and cooling. But instead of rolling that dough out to 1/4 inch thick, you would create a log. Then you would chill it for those 2 hours, and then you cut it into 1/4 inch thick rounds, which you then put on the sheet pan, parchment lined, put that in the fridge for 10 minutes, and then you bake that, and then you'll get round cookies very quickly and easily. I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is December 17th of 2024. I also post the recipe of the day link every single day in our Facebook group, 7 days a week. There's always a new one, so you can always get inspired about what you could be making that day, ask questions, and always get to the recipe so you have that. So make sure you are part of that Facebook group. It is at facebook.com/groups/recipeotd. I look forward to seeing you there. I'm Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.